The grand chamber of Galactic Forum. Station Omega-7 buzzed with the voices of 1,000 different species. Translators hummed in the air, turning clicks, whistles, and growls into understandable speech. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in their designated sections, arguing about mining rights in the 7th sector. It was a normal day, the kind that had repeated itself for 300 years. Dejo sat in the human section, his dark eyes scanning the chamber with practiced calm. He had served as Earth's ambassador for 12 years, and before him, others had held this post for centuries. Humans were known as peacekeepers, mediators who could find compromise when others saw only conflict. The galaxy trusted them, the galaxy needed them. But Dejo carried a secret that burned in his chest like a dying star. His communication device vibrated against his wrist. He glanced down at the message, though he already knew what it would say. The words glowed red on the small screen. Containment failure. Imminent 36 hours maximum. Dejo closed his eyes for a moment, then stood. The simple act of a human ambassador rising to speak brought immediate silence to the chamber. All eyes turned toward him. Waiting, they expected wisdom, perhaps a solution to the mining dispute. They expected normally representatives of the Galactic Forum. Dejo began, his voice steady despite the weight crushing his heart. Humanity thanks you for 3 centuries of friendship and cooperation. We have learned much from you. We hope we have given something valuable in return. Confusion rippled through the chamber. This was not how disputes were addressed. The Velcron representative, a tall being with crystalline skin, tilted his head in a gesture his species used to show puzzlement. We're sorry. Did you continued? We have to leave. Snorts. Don't follow us. The chamber erupted in chaos. 1,000 voices rose at once, demanding explanation. The hive collective representative, speaking through its shared consciousness, asked what humanity meant by this sudden change. The Koran Empire's ambassador accused humans of breaking the ancient treaties. Others simply stared in shock. Dejo said nothing more. He walked toward the exit, and the other human representatives followed. Their faces showed the same grief, the same terrible knowledge. They had all known this day might come. They had all hoped it would. Not outside the chamber. Mayan waited. In full military uniform, she commanded the human defensive fleet, though few in the galaxy knew that Earth's exploration vessels were actually warships in disguise. She fell into step beside Dejo as they moved through the stations corridors. All human personnel are evacuating as planned, Mayan reported. We're destroying facilities as we go. Nothing can be left behind that they might use to follow us. How long until the fleet is clear of galactic core space? Dejo asked. 72 hours for complete withdrawal, but the rear guard will need to hold position at the boundary for at least a week. Dejo nodded. They had practiced this evacuation in secret for years, running drills disguised as military exercises. Every human in galactic space knew their role. They had all volunteered to stay, knowing that one day they might have to run. Throughout the station, human facilities began to shut down. Research labs that had made breakthrough discoveries went dark. Medical centers that had healed countless aliens closed their doors. Human shops, human schools, human homes, all abandoned within hours. The humans took only what they could carry, destroying everything else. The Vulcan Admiral Felvin watched from his ship as human vessels began departing from every corner of the galaxy. His military mind recognized the precision of the operation. This was not panic or chaos. This was a planned retreat executed with frightening efficiency. Track them, he ordered his crew. I want to know where they're going, but the human ships were already jamming long-range sensors. They moved in coordinated groups, protecting each other as they fled toward the galactic rim. Some aliens tried to follow, demanding answers. Human ships simply accelerated beyond pursuit, leaving confusion in their wake. On Earth, billions watched the news in silence. They had known this might happen, but the reality still struck like a physical blow. Their friends, their colleagues, their loved ones who lived among the stars were coming home, and they were coming home because something terrible was about to be unleashed. Joe stood on the bridge of the departing diplomatic vessel, watching Omega-7 shrink in the distance. Behind them, the galaxy they had protected for 300 years descended into chaos. Accusations flew between species. Old grudges resurfaced. Without humans to mediate, conflicts that had been contained for centuries began to boil over. They'll tear themselves apart, one of the junior diplomats said quietly. Better that than what's coming, De replied. He thought about the discovery 600 years ago when the first human deep space expedition had found the architect's prison. He thought about the generations of humans who had worked in secret to reinforce the containment, to buy time for the galaxy. He thought about the choice humanity had made to protect species who would never know they needed protection, to sacrifice their place in galactic society for the greater good. Communication systems lit up with thousands of messages from alien governments. They all asked the same question: why? Joe deleted them all. They deleted them all. The galaxy would learn the truth soon enough, and when they did, they would understand why humanity had to leave. They would understand that the real terror was not humans deserting the forum. The real terror was what humanity had been holding back all along. 6 months had passed since the humans vanished from galactic space. Absence left a wound that would not heal. Trade routes that humans had maintained fell into disarray. Disputes that humans had mediated erupted into small wars. The galaxy, which had seemed so stable, revealed itself to be held together by human effort more than anyone had realized. The Vulcan Empire moved quickly to claim former human territories. Admiral Felvin led a battle fleet into the regions humans had once occupied, expecting empty stations and abandoned worlds. What he found instead disturbed him. Every human facility had been stripped bare. Computers held no data. Research centers contained no records. It was as if humans had erased themselves from existence. They took everything, his science officer reported, even things that should have been worthless. Personal items, entertainment records, children's drawings from the school sections. Why take such things unless you never plan to return? Felvin studied the empty station on his viewscreen. The humans had left the structures intact, but removed every trace of their presence. It felt wrong. Like visiting a tomb. Sir, we're detecting some data fragments in the old human research section. A technician called out. The files are heavily corrupted, but I'm pulling what I can On a research vessel 3 sectors away, a young Velcron scientist named Rollith worked through the night analyzing the fragments. Unlike many of his kind, Rollith had studied human culture extensively. He had friends among the humans before they left. Their sudden departure had hurt him personally, and he wanted to understand why. The data fragments made no sense at first. References to containment protocols and dimensional stress appeared repeatedly. One phrase appeared in dozens of files. The observers must not wake. Race leaned back in his chair, his crystalline skin reflecting the dim light of his laboratory. Observers. Dimensional stress. These were not terms associated with human trade or diplomacy. These were warnings, and if humans had been working on containment, then they had been containing something. He dug deeper into the records, cross-referencing with Galactic historical databases. 600 years ago, human deep space exploration had expanded rapidly. They had reached regions of space that other species avoided, claiming to search for resources. But what if they had found something else? Computer search for any unusual incidents in human explored space. 600 years ago, Rollith commanded. The computer thought for a moment, then displayed its findings. 17 human exploration vessels went missing in Sector 447. During that period, all were officially declared lost to navigation errors. 17 ships. That was not a navigation error. That was a disaster someone had covered up. Far from Rollith's laboratory, at the very edge of what had once been galactic territory, Captain Juan stood on the bridge of the human vessel Exodus. Dawn. Her crew was exhausted. They had been on duty for 6 months straight, watching sensors that showed something impossible approaching. Distance to the anomaly, Juan asked, still holding at 3 light years, Captain, her sensor officer replied. But the readings are getting stronger. Whatever it is, it's growing. Juan studied the display. Thing they detected should not exist. It was a tear in space itself, a wound in reality that pulsed with energy that made their instruments scream, and it was expanding slowly but steadily, reaching toward populated space like a hand extending from darkness. Any word from the containment teams? She asked. Their reporting increased pressure on the dimensional barriers. Engineer Himmel says the original containment fields are failing faster than predicted. Juan closed her eyes briefly. Hyan Wu was the best they had, a genius who had dedicated his life to understanding the prison humans had found 6 centuries ago. If he said the containment was failing, then they were running out of time faster than anyone had hoped. Maintain position, she ordered. We stay between that thing and the galaxy until we receive new orders. Her crew nodded. They all knew what staying meant. If the containment failed completely, the Exodus Dawn would be the first ship consumed. But someone had to stand watch. Someone had to buy time for the evacuation fleets to get humanity to safety on a hidden research station deeper inside human-controlled space. Hyan Wu worked with a team of 50 scientists on calculations that hurt to look at. The mathematics of dimensional barriers was not meant for human minds. It required thinking in directions that did not exist in normal space. Architects are becoming active again, Hung Wu said during a briefing with military commanders. We've managed to keep them dormant for 600 years, but the prison was damaged before we found it. We've been applying patches to Structure we don't fully understand now. Those patches are failing. How long do we have? Asked one of the commanders. Conservative estimate, 2 years before. Complete containment failure, optimistic. Maybe 3, but that's if we maintain current reinforcement levels. If we lose more teams to dimensional exposure, it could accelerate 2 years, 3 at most. That was how long humanity had to prepare for what was coming. Back in galactic space, Raleigh made a breakthrough. He found a human research paper that had been published 500 years ago, describing theoretical physics that had seemed like pure fantasy at the time, but reading it now with the context of the data fragments he had recovered, Arwith saw the truth. Humans had not been theorizing, they had been documenting. They had found something in the deep dark between stars, something that existed in more dimensions than the 3 everyone else could see, and they had been fighting to keep it contained ever since. Dear gods, Rollith whispered. They weren't part of the forum for politics or trade. They were guards. The humans were standing watch over something, and we never knew. He immediately tried to contact the human diplomatic channels, but all were silent. He sent messages to the last known positions of human ships, but received no response. Humanity had cut itself off completely from galactic communication. Rollith turned to his superiors, trying to explain what he had discovered, but without proof. His theory sounded like paranoid speculation. The Velcron Empire was more interested in claiming human territory than in listening to warnings about ancient prisons and beings from other dimensions dawn in the darkness at the galactic rim. Jiwen watched her sensors. The anomaly had grown again, spreading another 1,000 km. Soon it would reach the first human defense line. Soon they would have to start falling back. Captain, her communications officer said quietly, I'm picking up something from inside the anomaly. It sounds like a transmission, but the patterns don't match any known language. Jiwen listened to the recording. It was not words exactly. It was more like mathematics, patterns of energy that conveyed meaning through pure information, and the meaning was clear even without translation. The architects were waking up, and they were not pleased to find their prison still intact. 1 year after humanity's departure, the Valkyrian Empire controlled 12 former human stations and had established mining operations in 7 sectors. Humans had previously managed. Admiral Thelvin considered it a great victory. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominance, reviewing reports of increased profits and expanded territory. Sir, we're detecting unusual gravitational readings in Sector 442. His science officer reported. The patterns are inconsistent with any natural phenomena. Investigate. Delvin ordered without much concern. Space was full of unusual phenomena. His focus was on consolidating the Empire's new holdings, but the readings did not stop. Over the next week they spread. Star systems that had been stable for billions of years began experiencing gravitational fluctuations. Planets orbited at slightly wrong speeds. Moons drifted from their paths. The changes were small at first, barely noticeable, but they were growing. Thelvin sent a science vessel to investigate the source. It jumped into Sector 442 and immediately began transmitting frantic reports. The crew described seeing things that should not exist. Structures that appeared solid from one angle but transparent from another. Ships that had been declared lost centuries ago suddenly appearing intact. Their crews long dead, but their bodies not aged, and in the center of it all, a darkness that was not really darkness, but rather the absence of everything. Pull back immediately, Thelvin ordered. The science vessel tried to comply, but its engines would not respond normally. Space itself seemed wrong in the affected area. What should have been a simple jump to safety took 3 days of desperate navigation. When the vessel finally escaped, half the crew was dead, and the survivors were barely coherent. They're coming out, one scientist kept repeating. The things that should not be are coming out. Ralith was called to examine the survivors. What he found terrified him. The crew members showed signs of exposure to dimensions beyond normal space. Their bodies existed in 3 dimensions, but their minds had been touched by something that existed in more. They saw angles that did not exist, colors that had no name, and heard sounds that propagated through directions no one else could perceive. This is what the humans were protecting us from, Ray said to the medical team. This is why they left. He accessed the corrupted data files again, searching for any clue about how to stop what was happening. Deep in the fragments, he found a reference to something called the Architects. According to human records, they were a race that had existed before the current galactic civilization. They had transcended normal space, learning to exist in higher dimensions. But something had gone wrong. Another, even older race had imprisoned them, sealing them away to protect younger species. The humans had found that prison 600 years ago, and they had accidentally damaged it. Since then, humanity had worked in secret to repair and reinforce the containment. They had built entire fleets disguised as exploration and trade vessels. They had maintained research stations that claimed to study normal physics, but were actually studying dimensional barriers. Every human in galactic space had been part of the effort in some way, whether they knew it or not. And now that humans were gone, the containment was failing. Admiral Selvin finally understood the situation when his fleet encountered something in Sector 441. They had been conducting a standard patrol when space simply opened in front of them, not like a jump point or a wormhole, but as if reality had been torn like paper. Through the tear came something that his crew's eyes could not properly process. The ship's computer tried to describe it, but words failed. It was large and small simultaneously. It was close and far away. It existed in the place the fleet occupied while also being somewhere else entirely. Fire all weapons, Thelvin ordered, his voice surprisingly steady despite the fear crushing his chest. Energy beams and missiles struck the thing, but the weapons had no effect. They passed through it or were absorbed by it, or perhaps they hid it in dimensions the Velcron could not see. The thing did not seem hostile exactly. It simply was, and its existence was incompatible with the reality that surrounded it. Dominance's hull began to buckle, not from physical stress, but from spatial stress. The ship existed in 3 dimensions, and the thing from beyond was forcing it to acknowledge dimensions it was not built for. Bulkheads bent in impossible directions. Corridors led to places they should not reach. Crew members found themselves in rooms that were larger on the inside than the outside or that connected to sections of the ship that were miles away. Retreat, Thelvin ordered. Full speed, get us out of here. The fleet fled, leaving behind 2 ships that could not break free from the spatial distortions. Those vessels simply came apart, not from any explosion or attack, but because their structure could not maintain integrity when space itself was wrong. Delvin managed to get one message out before his communication systems failed. They were protecting us. The humans were protecting us. We didn't understand. On the human defensive line at the Galactic Rim, Engineer Sanho received telemetry from sensors placed throughout the old human territory. The containment breach was expanding faster than predicted. The architects were emerging from their prison, and without human maintained barriers to slow them, they would reach populated space within months instead of years. We need to inform the galaxy, one of his assistants said. Sun Ho shook his head. Ambassador Dezhou will decide when to make contact. Our job is to prepare the secondary containment line. The secondary line was humanity's fallback position. It would not stop the architects completely, but it would slow them enough to allow an evacuation. The cost would be enormous. Thousands of human ships and stations would need to be sacrificed to power the barriers. Millions of humans would need to remain behind, maintaining the fields until the last possible moment, and even then, there was no guarantee it would work. Rold finally convinced his government to take the threat seriously. He presented his evidence to the Velcroing Council, showing them the human records he had recovered and the data from Thelvin's encounter. The Council was forced to acknowledge the truth. They call an emergency session of the Galactic Forum. For the first time in a year, representatives from across the galaxy gathered to discuss the situation. Rollith presented his findings, describing the architects and the prison humans had maintained. The chamber fell into stunned silence when he finished. Then chaos erupted. Some species refused to believe him. Others blamed humans for the problem. A few demanded that humanity be forced to return and fix the containment. They cannot fix it, Rowley said quietly, and his voice somehow cut through the noise. According to the records, the prison was already failing when humans found it. They have spent 600 years buying us time. Now they have left to establish a new defensive position to protect us from a threat we did not know existed. Then what do we do? Someone asked. Rollith looked around the chamber at the gathered species. We evacuate. Humans will try to contain the architects at the Galactic Rim, but we need to give them time to work. We need to move every inhabited world in the eastern spiral to safety. We have perhaps 2 years. The galaxy finally understood. The humans had not abandoned them. The humans had gone to war. The emergency session of the Galactic Forum lasted for 3 days. Representatives argued and debated while sectors of space continued to fall to the spatial anomalies. Finally, they reached the decision. Hive Collective ran the calculations and delivered the grim news. We must evacuate 40% of galactic space within 2 years, the collective speaker announced. This includes 7 major species home worlds, 300 colony worlds, and approximately 4 trillion individuals. We must also abandon all infrastructure, mining operations, and research facilities in the affected zones. The number was too large to comprehend. Moving 4 trillion beings across such distances would require every available ship, and even then many would not make it in time. Riss stood before the assembled representatives and shared everything he had learned. He displayed the human records he had recovered, the data from the encounters with the architects, and the projections of how far the containment failure would spread. The humans knew this was coming. Rith explained, they have been preparing for years, perhaps decades. When they left us, they did not flee, they moved to establish a defensive line at the galactic rim where they could fight without endangering our worlds. Then, where are they now? Demanded a representative from the Koran Empire. Why have they not contacted us? Why do they remain silent while we face this crisis? As if in answer to the question, a transmission suddenly appeared on every communication device in the forum. It was audio only, and the voice was one many remembered. Ambassador Dejo spoke calmly, as if he was simply delivering another report. Representatives of the Galactic Forum, this is Earth's ambassador. I apologize for the delay in contact. We have been somewhat occupied. A star map appeared on the displays, showing the galactic rim. Red markers indicated human positions. There were hundreds of them, forming a line between the expanding anomaly and the rest of the galaxy. We are holding the line at Sector 447. Du continued, the architects are attempting to break containment, but we are containing their emergence. We estimate we can maintain this position for approximately 18 months, possibly longer if we receive reinforcement. Supply, however, and here Dejo's voice grew heavier, we recommend immediate evacuation of the eastern spiral. We cannot guarantee the containment will hold indefinitely. If it fails, the spatial distortions will expand exponentially. You have 2 years at most. The transmission included detailed evacuation routes, lists of resources humanity could spare, and coordinates of safe zones. The humans had planned everything, thought of everything. They had been preparing this evacuation for months, while the rest of the galaxy argued over their abandoned territories. We are aware that many of you are angry with us, Dejo said. We understand. We broke treaties, abandoned commitments, and left without explanation, but we did what we had to do. We left to protect you, and we will continue to protect you for as long as we are able. The transmission ended. The forum chamber sat in silence for a long moment. Then, species that had been fighting over human territory began organizing evacuation efforts. Old enemies cooperated, resources were shared freely. The galaxy came together in a way it had not done in centuries, but not everyone believed the threat was real. Some species refused to evacuate, convinced the crisis was exaggerated. Others were simply too slow to move, their bureaucracies unable to adapt quickly enough, and some worlds were too remote or too poor to organize evacuation on their own. 3 months after Dejo's message, the human defensive line at Sector 447 came under full assault. The architects had been testing the barriers, but now they pushed with their full strength. Admiral Yunji commanded the human fleet, and she knew they were outnumbered in a way that traditional military thinking could not comprehend. Contact bearing 37 Mark V. Her tactical officer reported multiple dimensional intrusions detected. All ships form defensive pattern. Sunho 7, Unjai ordered Engineering teams reinforced the dimensional barriers and grid sections 4 through 12. The human ships moved into position. They were not like normal military vessels. Each one was a mobile containment platform equipped with generators that could stabilize space itself. The crews were trained to fight an enemy that existed in directions they could not see, using weapons that worked in dimensions beyond human perception. The architects emerged from the tiers in space. Each one was unique and impossible. Some appeared as geometric shapes that hurt to look at. Others seemed like mathematical concepts given physical form. They moved through space in ways that defied physics, appearing in multiple locations simultaneously or traveling backward through time to attack before the humans could react. But humanity had been preparing for this fight for 600 years. Every ship captain knew the protocols. Every engineer understood the dimensional mathematics. Every soldier had trained to face an enemy beyond comprehension. Fire, containment, pulse. Yunji commanded. The human fleet activated their specialized weapons, energy beams that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, struck the emerging architects. The weapons did not destroy them, but rather pushed them back into the spaces between dimensions. Barriers of stabilized space closed around them, searing the tiers through which they tried to enter normal reality. The battle lasted 17 hours. By the end, the human fleet had lost 32 ships, but the line held. The architects were pushed back and the containment barriers were reinforced. In the human engineering section, Sunho worked continuously, directing repair efforts and adjusting barrier frequencies. He had not slept in 40 hours, sustained only by medication and desperation. The barriers were holding, but barely. Each assault from the architects weakened them. Each patch he applied bought them a few more days. We need more time, he said to his team. We need the evacuation to move faster, but the evacuation was moving as fast as it could across the eastern spiral. Billions of beings boarded ships bound for safer regions. Some worlds were completely evacuated, their population scattered across a dozen different destinations. Other worlds, too stubborn or too slow, remained inhabited even as the spatial anomalies crept closer. Combat pilot Minyu flew constant patrols along the human defensive line. His fighter was equipped with dimensional sensors that allowed him to detect architects before they fully emerged. It was exhausting work staring at readouts that showed reality breaking down, flying through space that sometimes decided to ignore the laws of physics. This is flight. Leader Minyu to command, he reported. After one patrol, we're seeing increased activity in sectors 9 and 10. The architects are testing the barriers every few minutes now instead of every few hours. They're learning our patterns. Acknowledged, came the response. Reinforcements are en route. Hold position, but reinforcements were getting scarce. Every day more human ships were damaged or destroyed. Every day more personnel were lost to dimensional exposure or simple exhaustion. The fleet that had been 20,000 strong when humanity first evacuated was now down to 12,000. And there were still 18 months left before the evacuation could be complete. N stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel that now served as fleet headquarters. He watched the tactical displays, seeing the red markers of human positions and the purple haze of the architect's attempts to break through. His people were dying to buy time for species that had once called them friends. Sir, we're receiving messages from the forum. Communications officer said, multiple species are requesting we abandon the defensive line and retreat to safety. Delete them, Deja ordered. We are not leaving. The galaxy was learning what humanity had always known. Some things were worth fighting for. Some positions had to be held regardless of the cost, and sometimes the only way to protect those you cared about was to stand between them and the darkness, even when it meant you might not survive. 3 years after humanity deserted the Galactic Forum, the defensive line at Sector 447 was breaking. Admiral Yunji stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching damage reports scroll across her screens. The human fleet was down to 4,000 ships. They had lost 16,000 vessels holding the line, buying time for the evacuation that was still not complete. Status report. Yunji ordered. Her tactical officer looked exhausted. They all looked exhausted. Barrier strength at 40% and falling. We've lost 3 more containment platforms in the last hour. The architects are coordinating their attacks now. They're hitting the same points repeatedly until the barriers collapse. Yunji studied the tactical display. The purple haze representing the architects had grown massive. Behind the human defensive line, the eastern spiral was mostly evacuated, but not entirely. Millions of beings remained on distant worlds, unable or unwilling to leave, and beyond the defensive perimeter in the space humanity had abandoned, entire sectors had been consumed by spatial anomalies. How long can we hold? She asked quietly. Hours, Admiral. Admiral, maybe a day if we're lucky. Captain Juan's vessel, the Exodus Dawn, was one of the few ships remaining from the original rear guard. A crew had fought for 3 years straight, watching friends die and ships burn. She sat in her command chair, monitoring the deteriorating situation, and knew the end was coming. Captain, we're receiving a fleet-wide transmission from Ambassador Dejo. Her communications officer reported. G1 accepted the transmission. Dejo's face appeared on her screen. He looked older than she remembered, aged by the weight of command and the burden of impossible decisions. All fleet personnel, this is Ambassador Dejo. I want to begin by thanking you. Every person in this fleet volunteered to stand between the galaxy and annihilation. You have fought with courage and dedication beyond anything I could have asked. Because of you, 4 trillion beings have been evacuated to safety. Because of you, the galaxy survives. He paused, and Juan saw the grief in his eyes. But our mission is not yet complete. There are still 300 million individuals who have not been evacuated. They are on remote worlds in isolated colonies, places we could not reach in time, and the containment is failing. Within hours, the architects will break through our lines and spread across the remaining inhabited space. Juan felt her hands tighten on her armrests. She knew what was coming. We have one option remaining, Dejo continued. We can collapse the containment field inward rather than letting it fail outward. This will create a permanent dimensional rift, a scar in space that will seal the architects away permanently. The rift will encompass all of Sector 447 and extend through the regions we currently occupy. He did not need to explain what that meant. Everyone in the fleet understood. They would be trapped inside the rift, sealed away with the architects forever. This is a volunteer operation, Dejo said. Any ship that wishes to retreat has permission to do so. You have served beyond any reasonable expectation. No one will think less of you for choosing to survive. Jiwon looked around her bridge. Her crew looked back at her. They did not speak, but she saw their answer. Their eyes. Exodus Dawn volunteers to remain, she transmitted to fleet command. Across the fleet, 4,000 ships made the same choice. Not one vessel retreated. They had come to hold the line, and they would hold it to the end. Engineer Sunho prepared the dimensional collapse with tears streaming down his face. He was one of the few people who fully understood what they were about to do. The mathematics were elegant and terrible. By folding space inward, they would create a bubble of isolated reality. Inside that bubble, the architects would be contained forever, but so would everyone inside. The current defensive perimeter, the collapse will take approximately 1 hour. Once initiated, Sunho explained to the command staff, during that time the barriers will actually strengthen as space folds inward, but once the process begins, it cannot be stopped or reversed. How long will the seal last? Someone asked. Permanently, Sunho replied. The rift will exist outside normal time. From the perspective of anyone inside, time might continue normally. From the outside, the rift will appear frozen, unchanging. It will last until the heat death of the universe. Admiral Yunji gave the order. Begin collapse sequence. Sunho's hands moved across his controls. Across the fleet, dimensional generators activated. In a new configuration, space began to fold slowly at first. Then faster. The purple haze of the architects contracted, pulled inward by forces they could not resist. Dejo opened the final transmission to the galaxy. Every ship, every station, every world received it. His voice was calm and clear. This is Ambassador Dejo, speaking on behalf of humanity. To all species of the galactic form, we say goodbye and good luck. You call us friends, partners, allies. We were honored to be all three. On the bridge of her ship, Mayan stood at attention as she monitored the collapse. She had commanded human military forces for 20 years, had planned this evacuation, had prepared for this moment. But knowing it was coming did not make it easier. We're doing what humans do, Dejo continued. Protecting those who need it, no matter the cost. We do not regret our choice. We do not want your grief. We want you to live, to build, to thrive. Make the galaxy into something worth the price we paid. Combat pilot Minnow flew one last patrol along the collapsing perimeter as fighter sensors showed space folding in on itself, reality condensing into a smaller and smaller volume. He thought about his family on Earth, about the life he could have had, but he also thought about the billions who would live because of what he and his fellow pilots had done. All ships, this is Ambassador Dejo. Don't mourn us, don't build monuments or hold ceremonies. Just live well, that's all we ask. The dimensional collapse accelerated. Space twisted, folded, compressed. The 4,000 human ships and 40,000 personnel began to fade from normal reality, slipping into the sealed dimension they had created. Captain Jiwon watched her view screen as the stars vanished, replaced by something that was not quite. Darkness her ship shuddered as. Dimensions she could not perceive closed. Around it but the hall held, the crew remained safe, at least for now. Captain, her sensor officer said. Quietly, I'm detecting the architects. They're all around us, but they're contained. The rift is holding. Juan allowed herself a small smile. They had done it. The galaxy was safe. Sun Ho watched his monitors as the collapse completed. The dimensional mathematics showed a stable rift, a permanent seal. Inside, time would continue to pass. Trapped human vessels would need to find a way to survive in their pocket of sealed reality, but outside the galaxy would be protected forever. The last thing Dejo transmitted before the rift closed completely was a simple message. Goodbye, be good to each other. Then silence across the galaxy. Billions of beings stopped what they were doing. They stared at communication devices, at view screens, at the night sky, where Sector 447 had been. There was now a region that sensors could not penetrate. A wound in space that would never heal. A scar that marked where humanity had made its final stand. Roll stood in his laboratory, tears flowing down his crystalline face. He had tried to warn them, he had tried to make the galaxy understand in time. But he had failed. And the humans had paid the price for that failure. I'm sorry, he whispered to the empty room. I'm so sorry. Galactic Forum met in emergency session. For once no one argued, no one debated. They passed a unanimous resolution. Memorial would be established at the edge of the rift. Resources would be provided to all human survivors. No questions asked, and every species would teach their children about the humans who stood watch in the darkness. Decades passed, the galaxy rebuilt. Children were born who had never known humans, who learned about them only through stories and histories. But at the edge of the rift, the vigil continued. Ships from every species took turns maintaining a watch station, monitoring the sealed dimension where 40,000 humans remained. Roll, now old and near the end of his life, visited the memorial one final time. He stood before the monument, which bore the names of every human who had been sealed away. We never forgot, he said to the names carved in stone. We never will. And sometimes on quiet nights, sensor operators at the watch station reported strange readings from inside the rift, patterns that almost looked like transmissions, energy signatures that might have been signals, as if somewhere in the sealed dimension the humans still stood watch, still protecting the galaxy from the architects, still holding the line. Even in their eternal prison, the galaxy had watched in terror as humans deserted the forum. But now they understood. The humans had never deserted anyone. They had gone to war, and they had won the only victory that mattered. They had saved everyone else.